Welcome to another episode of Behind the Scenes. Today's guest is actually not in the porn industry, although you would think so based on the title of his book. But I decided, and we had discussed this because he and I had been chatting off and on, that I wanted to have a sit down with him and get to know him better, learn more about his experience that brought about the Porn Again book. So obviously I give him away who is going to be on the show, Mr. Josh Sabarra. And ironically, it turned out that this was just a perfect time to put this out and put this up. And I'm looking forward to sharing even more about the man that he didn't actually include in all in the book. And if you have not read any of his material yet, then I strongly suggest that you do. And I'm telling you, it's an amazing book about coming out, coming to realization, and coming to know yourself on a level that people don't always take the time to do. So I'm looking forward to sharing his story here with you today, and I want to welcome Josh to the show. Thank you.
Hi, Ange.
Hi. Welcome
How
to
are
the
you?
show. I'm great. Welcome to the show. I'm really glad to have you sit down and have a conversation with me. I'm really
Well,
excited about this.
I feel like I know you from Twitter, so it's so nice to actually get to connect with you like this.
Exactly. I'm looking forward to asking you questions. Obviously, I've read your book, Porn Again,
Thank you.
which was really entertaining. I loved it. I mean, you kept it real. I mean, and that was really important. That's really important when you're reading something about somebody's life, that they actually put themselves into the book, and that's awesome.
Well,
But
I think that's such an important. In order for people to connect to material of any kind, I think people need to know that they're getting the real deal. You know, they need to get warts and all. And I think nowadays people don't respond to fluff and things that sort of gloss over truths and things that we need to have conversations about. And, that was very important to me with Porn Again, that the book really didn't shy away from anything. It sort of just dives in head first and stays that way from beginning to end. And that was sort of my, with my editor, my agent, that was sort of part of the agreement, was that if we were going to do this book, it was going to be done that way. So I appreciate that you sort of found that in there.
I did. But I see that on your online persona too, and that you keep it authentic, and that you put yourself out there in a real way, which, sometimes people create a separate persona, and that's okay too. I mean, if it
Right.
helps you, with life and coping and all that, it's great. But every now and then it's great to see a little vulnerability in there, because that's what keeps us grounded and human, and makes us
Right. And
it makes it
right.
easier to connect with others.
Of course, and as you know from having read the book, it took me a really long time to get to a place where I felt comfortable in my own skin. And then once I found that, it's very, I sort of live my life unapologetically at this point. I mean, I do the best I can to not hurt anybody or harm anyone while doing that. But, I think, there was no going back.
Well, it's hard to put the horse back in the barn after it's burned
Yeah.
down. And
The
who
horse
wants
is-
to go into a burned barn anyway?
Exactly.
There's a reason why it got burned in the first place. So
Right. By the way, I applaud everybody who, anybody who has sort of is brave enough to put themselves out there in any way, and even if there is an online persona that works for them or gives them strength, there's never there's no judgment on anyone for how they cope or how they present themselves. Everybody has to be himself or herself or themselves, and
I agree.
that's how
I totally agree. I totally agree.
celebrate all of it.
So I'm just going to start in with a few questions, and this is more for people who may not know who you are, and this may be an introduction to who you are. So
Okay, great.
let's let's just, and I ask this of everybody, just give me some background on Josh growing up. Where did you grow up? How was school? The basics, the fun.
Right.
Stuff.
Well, a lot of this people will find in the book, in my first book. I grew up in South Florida. My parents were originally New Yorkers, and they sort of did the move to New York before they got older kind of thing. My father is a urologist, so you can imagine that business in Florida is good.
Yes.
There's a lot of leaky faucets there. So my parents moved to Florida before I was born, which is interesting because then I am actually a native Floridian, which you don't find too often.
No.
So many people, right? So I grew up in Florida, but with a very New York sensibility because, my grandparents all lived in New York for quite a while I was growing up. They eventually migrated to Florida as well. But I grew up sort of going back and forth to New York. And then my first job and my first sort of real experience on my own was in New York. And I lived there for a few years and then moved to LA and have now been in LA for just over 20 years, which is very hard to believe. But no, I had a great experience in Florida. I don't know that at this point in my life I would want to live in South Florida, but at that time, it was sort of a nice climate and a nice place to grow up. It was hard. It was a hard growing up because I was bullied, very severely bullied from the time I was 5 or 6 years old. The first time was from an adult at a summer camp that I was sent to, at a day camp that I was sent to, and it sort of spiraled and ballooned from there. So, I had issues with self-worth from that moment on, which sort of informed and affected the rest of my life. So I wouldn't say it was easy, but, I have great memories of certain things growing up too. It's not all, there's always a little bit of both,
Mm-hmm. So
I don't know, is that enough of a nutshell?
It is. I mean, did you suspect early that you were gay?
Oh, I knew as soon as I had any sort of awareness. I knew something felt different. I would say as early as preschool. I didn't know what it was,
Mm-hmm.
but there was this fiber of awareness that sort of ran through me that knew that something was different, and I knew that I had some kind of attraction to boys rather than girls. Not necessarily something sexual, but some kind of draw.
Okay. So, how was that coming out? I mean, how did that affect the family, the structure, when you finally?
Well, I didn't come out until I was 31, and I was a virgin until I was 31. As I always joke, I made up for lost time, but.
Yeah, so we discovered that within the pages of your book.
Yeah. But, because I was so bullied and marginalized, I felt, it was so drilled into me so early that whatever these feelings I had were wrong or not, or something to keep away from everyone. That sort of got drilled into me so early that I really sort of resolved at that point that I was going to keep it to myself as long as I possibly could, because you always, at least for me, I knew that my parents, were very accepting, liberal, open-minded people, but you never know how somebody's going to react when it's within their own family. And I was concerned that because I was I was treated so poorly and so sort of schooled by all of these other people when I left my house, that if my parents found out about that maybe they would start to feel that way about me as well. Now, of course, that's in the mind of a 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old.
Right.
Look back at it now, obviously that's not necessarily rational thinking, but that's sort of an immature, not quite developed
Yes.
way of thinking. So I sort of resolved to put my head down and just sort of live my life. And I just noticed I say sort of a lot.
It's
I guess
okay.
I don't want to commit one way or the other, so it's sort of.
That's actually still the 5-year-old in there. It's okay. It's still there. It's all right. It's hard. It's hard to let go of that sometimes, and there are key words that we use to
Right.
lighten up the power behind what we're trying to say and make it okay. And you don't need to
Right.
do that with me. But it's great. I
But
understand it.
it's a tick, you know. It's something
Yeah.
that you work
Yeah.
into your speech pattern, and you don't even realize that you repeat those phrases so often. Um, so I sort of kept it, kept that, you know, I kept all of the romance and anything related to my sexuality out of my life, and I let my career be my cover. I moved up in the entertainment business extremely fast. I was a senior executive at a movie studio before I was 28. So all of that sort of wonderkin status that, were sort of my smoke and mirrors. It kept people from paying attention to what was underneath that, and it let that be, what filled me up, as opposed to the real raw humanness of it all.
Okay. What do you? I mean, I know you touched on this in your book, but there was a cataclysm. There was this cataclysmic moment that you had to have decided, okay, enough's enough.
Yes.
It's time to live an authentic life. And
Well, yeah.
how did that look to you? I mean, it had to have been both empowering and terrifying all at the same time, completely.
It was. It was. It actually was at exactly this time period. It was in December, and I was invited to the bar mitzvah of the son of somebody I worked with at a movie studio, and she had invited me. And I remember thinking at the time that while she and I were friends, I'd only known her about a year, and I thought, or less, and I thought it was. At the time, I thought it was somewhat strange that I would have been invited to sort of such a intimate family event. Then I realized once I got there and saw how I was seated, it appeared to me that part of the reason I was invited was because one of her best friends was a single gay man. And I think she thought that maybe there would be some attraction there. Of course, I wasn't out. So I get to the event and I see this man who's, is a very nice looking man, certainly very attractive. And he caught my attention. And when I noticed that we were sort of sat at the same table and like 2 seats away from each other, I sort of put 2 and 2 together. She's a great person, and I've continued to know her through all of these years, but at that time, I think part of her reason for inviting me was the potential setup. Some people have said to me, "Oh, I don't know if that was," I don't know. That's how it seemed to me. And so the gentleman, kept looking at me, and I kept looking at him, and it was this very awkward. There was definitely something. My heart was beating, and there was definitely something. And so it made me feel very uncomfortable because it wasn't something I had dealt with yet, not with the people closest to me, let alone this table of strangers. So I basically darted out of that event as fast as I could. And I think probably went on till midnight or 1 a.m, and by 9:30 I was in my car on the way home. And as I was driving home, and the next day, I kept thinking about the event and thinking about this gentleman, and I was like, what if that's the person I'm supposed to meet? What if that's, maybe it's time. And it was December, and it was time for me to go home to Florida for the holidays. And so I went home and had a very restless holiday break because it was really weighing on me. So I stayed, I was home in Florida, and I just kind of went through the motions. And the minute I got back to LA, I went to a therapist because I had never even said out loud I'm gay. I'd never said those words out loud or acknowledged it even to myself in any real, concrete kind of way. So I went to the therapist because I felt that I needed to say it to someone who was objective.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, your friends rally around you and they're happy for you, but I wanted somebody who was completely not invested in me other than, you know, the situation that was in front of her. And to be able to say it to somebody and know what it was like to even say it for the first time. And so she said to me, you know, okay, well, we can work together to come to a point where you're ready to tell your family. And I said, oh no, now that I've said it to you, I'm ready to talk to them. Like, then once the gate was open, there was no, I was ready to sort of, you know, it wasn't really a coming out of the closet, it was like a flying out of the closet.
It's like opening up the dam waters and out all of it comes. I get it.
Right.
I get it.
Point, you know, and for the first time I had seen somebody or met somebody and I was like, there was something about me that was more open to it than ever before. I guess I realized that I had been living for so many years, you know, focusing on, I won't say the wrong things, but putting all of my energy into one area of my life and really ignoring a part that was so important. And here I had these feelings stirring for the first time, and I just thought, you know what, I need to live on my terms at this point.
You did. And
So
I'm
that-
glad that you did. I'm honestly glad that you did embrace that. It's super
Me
important.
too.
So, what did you find most challenging? And I don't want to go into super detail in your you know, the film industry started that, but what was
Right.
the most challenging part though of keeping this part of your life separate? I mean, private. Then and from what you were dealing with, because you know there are a lot of gay people in the film industry.
Yeah.
And you,
Yeah.
it's a radar thing. I know it is because you guys see and find each other. Did you get approached by people? I mean, was there parts of that you?
And I had a number of Me Too moments as well from other men. Fortunately, they were things that, you know, were not, I was able to navigate my way through, but they were extremely, you know, uncomfortable moments. I talk about one in particular in the book where I was at an awards show. I was sitting next to a producer who I want to say it was even before the first or second commercial break, who leaned over to me and said in my ear, "Have you ever been tied up before?" That's just one example. And I was out of there at the first commercial break. Like, I couldn't get out of my seat fast enough, and I left and I ran into the bathroom, and I just remember walking in there like in my black tie, you know, my tuxedo, like standing in the mirror and like rubbing my face with the paper towels and thinking to myself, what am I going to do? I can't go back in there. Because then I felt like everybody, you know, even though this isn't accurate, but in my mind, everybody was looking at me, and it was so uncomfortable and so inappropriate, and I just left and I never went back to my seat. So that was one. But, you know, so there were things like that occurred. There were also some, you know, people who who assumed I was out and would approach me in terms of, you know, would you be interested in going out on a date? And of course I would find ways to wangle out of that, you know, to say, oh, I'm so busy with work. You know, I would never make anyone feel bad for asking. But it made me, you know, because it was an unresolved issue within myself, I was so uncomfortable with those things. So I would come up with excuses and reasons, and my job allowed me to have that excuse. I was busy all the time, you know. And to your point, yes, you know, the entertainment industry is extremely, for the most part, accepting. But, you know, one of the difficult parts was that I wasn't ready to come out, and then certain, you know, people assume or would realize that I am gay, and I would sort of avoid those people who wanted to talk about my personal life. So then it became this game of dodgeball, of avoiding the people I call wild cards, the people who couldn't sense that it was an uncomfortable subject for me, and would press me. Oh, are you seeing anybody? I have a friend I'd like to introduce you to. Tell me about the kind of guys you're interested in. Things like that. So then I would avoid people who would press me in that way. But I would stay. But then there were other people who obviously sensed my unease with it and would never bring anything like that up. So I gravitated towards those people. Interestingly, once I did finally come out, and I didn't go to work and announce to everyone, I figured people would find out when I met somebody or when I said I was ready to date someone that it didn't need to be a declaration. It just
yeah.
It needed to be folded into my life, and it didn't need to be an event for those people. But I found that the people who were the wild cards that I mentioned, of course they mean well. And, they would say things like, we're so happy now you can, and then my relationships with them changed and I became very close with some of those people, and they meant well, but they didn't realize at the time that it was putting me, in such a vulnerable spot that made me feel uncomfortable. They of course didn't realize that. Nobody, I don't think, does it with that intention.
Not to be malicious, no.
No. So, everything about coming out, professionally and personally, was just a huge relief. It was like a breath of fresh air, because all of a sudden your relationships with people are more real. Like, there's not this elephant in the room, there's not this thing that people are dancing around, there's not some odd navigation of conversational politics. It's everything's sort of out in the open at that point, and then I just felt free.
Well, it's like being in a field and knowing that there's landmines out there that you can't see, and then all of a sudden you get these goggles or the ability to see everything for what it truly is, and so you're not having to navigate that anymore. It's got to be extremely freeing. Extremely freeing.
It is.
So you made the conscious decision to finally come out. When did the conscious decision come to write it all in a book?
Well, I continued to work in entertainment for about 10 years after before the book came out. I was working on writing was always, I have no performing talent at all. Writing was always my strength. Communication, obviously I was in marketing and PR, so communication was always, my forte. And I thought to myself, I think this delayed adolescence, this understanding that you can step into yourself really at any point in your life, I think is something that people who have felt different in any way can relate to. Whether you've been seen as different because you have a disability, whether you've struggled with your weight, either one way or the other. People who are struggle to put weight on to look healthy struggle as much as people who are overweight. It's both sides of that equation. Or anybody who's felt different in any way. I felt, yes, my difference happened to be that I am gay, but if you take the gay part out of it and you sort of substitute anything that's made somebody feel not good enough at any point,
right?
I figured that this was a story for those people, and really, there are so many people who have experienced that, and I realized that the story was more universal than I even thought to begin with. And so I spoke to, I had an agent at the time, and I spoke to the agent and I said, I really want to do this project, and this is sort of my idea for the book, and this is how I want to structure it. Mm-hmm. And they said, well, can you do a little bit of work on it and let us see sort of how, what the outline would be, and then, maybe a couple of chapters so we see how this would unfold. And so I worked on it with them, and then worked on it with my editor, and then Born Again was born. But it was, it was a hard thing to do and a hard choice to make, because being a truth teller and being honest in a town that isn't necessarily known for that.
No, it's a town of make-believe.
Right. It's a very difficult choice to make because you realize that you get people who celebrate the fact that you tell your story, and you get people who don't like the way they're represented or don't like the way their behavior looks when played back for them. Mm-hmm. So it was a tricky choice to make, I have to tell you, but I was so it felt so important to me to do it at that time, and it felt so right to me. And I remember my agent said to me, there are two things you have to think of. One is, once one copy is out, you can never take it back. And two, you have to look at, you can probably look at the book and say, okay, these people might be upset by what they read, whether they're named or not, they may see themselves there. And you have to be able to live with the fallout when you run into those people, when they reach out to you in a way that may not be positive. And I did what she said, and I made that list, and I would say the list was 100% accurate, give or take one or two people. Everyone sort of fell exactly where I thought they would. And you know what? It still felt freeing to me. It was like it still felt like, this is my truth, this is my story, this is how the events affected me, and I don't know, I felt very good about doing it. It felt very important to me to do, and I feel very proud of that book still. So, sure, there were some uncomfortable moments, and there were those people who had issues with things, but you know what? There were also new, wonderful people who came into my life because of it. So that's sort of the cycle,
Well, I mean, I wouldn't deem it a tell-all book, as
I call it I don't call it a tell-all. I call it a tell it like it is.
Well, but it's from your perspective as someone who is evolving in his life, and these people were a part of your evolution. And it's not like you were trying to paint them in a bad light. It's just how things came out, how you perceived them, and how you dealt with them. And
exactly, that's exactly right. It was a faithful telling, to the best of my memory, because it's a memoir. So obviously you don't have recordings of interviews with people. So you remember dialogue, but so many of those really important, affecting moments are so burned into your mind. I could recite exact dialogue from certain situations. So the book is extremely accurate, and it is exactly how things unfolded. And yes, there was nothing about the book that was intended to harm or be malicious. It was a telling of my story, and only in as much as those other people affected my story were they important to the book.
Right. So, what is, now that the book's out and you've got you've got two out, right? There's two that I
have.
Okay. I haven't read the second one yet, so that one is still on my to-read list.
Yes.
It is on my to-read list. But you're on book 2, and how has that impacted your life, being a published author and a very successful one at that? How has it affected all of the things that you had going on in your world?
It sort of refocused me a little bit. It's given me an opportunity to, I still produce some television. So, I've kept sort of, a foot dangling in the industry a little bit, but it's given me this entirely new outlet and platform sort of to express myself and say the things that I want to say, hopefully in a way that entertains people. And it's given me an opportunity to meet so many great and interesting people. So, I don't know, I love it. I mean, there are moments where, writing, as you know, is a very isolating, a very, almost private thing. Like, you go into your little world, and it's hard because, being a social person for the most part, and and being someone who is used to being in a workplace and having people, you flop down in someone's office and you talk about what happened the night before, and now all of a sudden everything's in my own head.
Yes.
You know, so that's the part that's been an interesting adjustment to me, and I have to create my own social situations now. I don't have a place to go each day. So that part has been interesting, but I have to say I have loved this journey, and I hope to be able to stay on it.
Well, I hope you stay on it because I'm enjoying watching your journey too.
Well,
good.
I fight through a tooth and nail.
So tell me how the name. How did you decide on Porn Again? How did that come into play?
Well, it was interesting. I mean, first of all, I did want a provocative title. Mm-hmm. I wanted something that was cheeky and playful, and that gave people an idea that what kind of voice they were going to get in the book.
Right.
So yes, there are really serious moments, and there are really hard parts of my story. There, as you remember, there's the suicide of my closest friend. Addiction to, eating disorders, addiction to cosmetic surgery. There are a lot of things that were very difficult for me, but I worked very hard to not let the book wallow in that. I address them, and I address them very directly, and I address the emotions attached to those things, but I don't sit in them in a dark place. And I wanted people to know that the book had a sense of fun to it, and that you were going to also laugh, in this story, because my worldview tends to have humor in it. So, I look at things, even things that other people sometimes can't find the humor in. I try to find that part of things. So I wanted that sensibility to be in the title. And then also, you'll notice there are moments throughout the book where adult entertainment plays a role in my evolution, and not necessarily in the way it does for other people. For me, because I was not comfortable with myself so long, and I wasn't sexually active, it was really an outlet for me. It was a safe outlet for me, and it was a way that I could sort of learn a little bit about human sexuality without to me at that time.
Okay, stop. So, how did you come up with the title of the book?
So, the book obviously is, a fun play on words. It was important to me that the title be, I wanted it to grab attention, first of all. Also, I wanted it to really communicate to potential readers the voice that they would find in the book. I try to look at things with a sense of humor, and I think the book sort of captures my sensibility. And I wanted people to know when they saw that okay, this is going to be a cheeky, fun read, and that even the moments that are dark, the book covers a lot of dark material, but we don't wallow in it. Mm-hmm. I don't. Even if certain parts of the story bring you, down to a certain place, we go right back up, with sort of a sense of humor. So I wanted the title to convey that. Also, I feel like adult entertainment played a very interesting role in my life, because being a virgin until I was 31, I had no sexual experience at all. I didn't know anything about how people interact in a sexual way. And so adult entertainment really gave me sort of a glimpse into it. Now, yes, you and I both know that what you see on your screen is not necessarily what's happening in every bedroom, mm-hmm. Some of it is. But, it's a very heightened reality. But it really gave me sort of an outlet, and it gave me sort of a way to connect to human sexuality in some way that felt safe and comfortable and private for me. So, I talk about that in the book, and how, in some ways, um, porn was a lifeline for me. And then also threaded through the book is how a number of people who work in the adult industry sort of came into my life in these roundabout ways that weren't even connected to, my work in entertainment, but just in these interesting, strange ways. And then, of course, the ultimate reason for the name of the book is the last chapter, and sort of where, this moment that ties the whole book together, which hilariously takes place in a porn shop with me and my parents. And I'm not going to say more than that.
No, don't give away the ending, because they have to read the book if they haven't. Anybody that
Exactly.
knows I'm not going to give that away. So that's good. That's a
Right.
good teaser.
Many people have been in a porn shop with their parents.
Exactly.
Not many.
No, not many. I know I haven't. So,
And you want to know the funniest thing is, my parents were out here visiting me over the summer, and they visited a porn set.
really? Oh, how
Yeah.
interesting. What was their take on it? What'd they think?
Yes, I wanted them. Well, there were a couple of people I wanted them to meet who are friends of mine, and that seemed the best way to get everybody in the same room at the same time. And also, like I said, my father's a urologist, so sexuality and that kind of thing is not as much of a hot button, or a lot of people don't, they don't want to think of their parents in that context, or even think about their own sexuality or their parents' sexuality. For me, that was never an issue. So it just didn't feel strange at all. I mean, naturally, we didn't stay the whole day. They didn't, stay for every moment of it. But it was funny that we even went a step further, and they sort of got to see how movie magic happens.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, obviously, I've interviewed quite a few porn stars,
Yeah.
and producers and directors.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to me that you are actually giving the perspective that we talk about in some of my other interviews about how porn has impacted the fans, people who watch it. And it is, in some cases, their way of learning about their sexuality, and or even learning about how to be gay for another, because they may be they have been or were in the same position where they were struggling with how to be gay, how to accept their sexuality, and or they were in a situation where they couldn't be out or open about it, so this was their way of trying to learn, because it's not like you
And in
can
many
find
ways, it
textbooks
provides-
about this.
But also, there are also many ways in which it is a safe alternative to behavior that might otherwise be dangerous. That some people, have that as an outlet. Look, I think if you look at any subject, you can find pros and cons of just about anything. Any argument one can make for something, you'll find someone who says yes, but there are also people who, see some of these heightened situations and feel that it's degrading, or there's opinions about all of these things are across the spectrum, and you will always find people who have, who fall on one side or the other. So, I don't discount anyone's opinion. Nobody, not everybody has to agree with me. That's sort of, I think we've come to this place, I think sort of culturally right now, people, there's this idea that if we don't agree, we cancel the other person out, or we, and I don't know that that's necessary. I mean, everybody doesn't have to agree with me to be a good person or be a kind person. But back to your original question, like for me, I think that there are some very positive, positive aspects to adult entertainment, and I think it's all a matter of it's so individual. it's such an individual thing. I think some people be affected by it positively. Some people, it has a negative impact. It's all such an individual thing. For me, I found it to be extremely positive. And I will say that the people I've met in the industry, and of course I don't work in the adult industry, but everybody I've met, I have to say, I mean, it's such a lovely, unique group of people,
Yes.
and I think you've seen that. I think you've sort of seen the familial nature of it, and people, for the most part, in my experience, seem to be very supportive of each other, and everybody I met has been so far has been bright and sort of in control of his or her business and how they're doing things and sort of owning it. And I don't know, I feel like my experiences with the people who do sex work have all been relatively positive. I mean, like with anything, you're always going to have
Well,
good and
here's
bad.
the funny part. You come for the porn, you stay for the family. That's kind of how I look at it. And in every family, you have those family members that don't always seem to have their stuff together. And
But that's not
yes,
in everything. There's that in
exactly. So to throw
but
a
for
stigma on something like that just has never made any sense to me, that we have such a stigma about sexuality. And it plays right into your own having to come to grips with who you are. If there wasn't such this humongous stigma to who you are sexually and whose business it is of who you choose to love or be attracted to, I think we would be in a whole lot better position. Now, granted, your life experience you've been through is, I believe, serves a purpose.
right.
Not only for your own growth, but I think you are impacting people more so than you probably even realize. You are helping them through their own transitions of dealing and coping.
Well,
Because as I said,
so
there aren't a lot of people who have reference material to go to.
that was the goal, and that was sort of the point of doing that book. Was I wanted there to be this piece of material out there for people who need to or want to connect in that way. And and I think, to your point about stigma and shame that is attached to sex sometimes, you know, and the stigma that surrounds people who are sex workers or who work in the business, I feel like that's such a sort of an antiquated way of thinking. I mean, everybody whom I have worked with, or have who have been involved, many, I've worked with a number of models, to promote the book and for photo shoots and, promotional materials. And, everybody has been professional, on time, takes their work seriously, does the best to make everything as good as they possibly can. I mean, everybody has really, I've worked with people in mainstream entertainment who aren't half as put together.
Or professional.
Or professional. So, there's no one who's going to get me to have anything negative to say about,
Agreed.
people who are hardworking, honest people.
I agree. So tell me, is there anything about your journey so far, not that you would necessarily take away, but maybe do a little different?
Sure. I mean, there's always something where you look back and you think, if I could rewind and record over that, I would. But I'm not. I don't really live in regret at all. I don't see any value in it. There's just, I don't see what it's worth to take the time regretting something. I think the best thing you can do is be aware that maybe you behaved in a way that you wouldn't now. Or maybe I think the key is being aware of your behavior and seeing how you might do better next time.
Okay. It's a good one.
You
I
know what I
like
mean?
it.
Just
Yeah.
don't, I just don't see there's no it's like when people worry. You know, I think it's legitimate to have concern. I
Mm-hmm.
think you can concern and worry are two different things. But worrying is just a lot of energy that doesn't result in anything because basically we worry about fictional narratives. We worry about, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? And until it happens, it's all fiction.
It also is energy eating.
It's done. We're spending a lot of time and energy on something that may or may not happen. And how many things have you ever worried about that how many things have actually come to pass in such a negative way? I mean, such a small fraction of what we worry about technically turns out so poorly.
Yeah.
So why spend any energy on the worry and the regret? Just an awareness of how you're living your life and, you know, your level of compassion for other people and doing the best we can. And guess what? Sometimes I don't always get it right. And when I don't, I try to be aware of that, or I'm open to somebody telling me that I didn't. And you know what? I'll do better next time, or try my best to do better next time. And I think that's all we can ask of anybody.
I like that. So, who's your biggest influence?
Oh, um, I don't know. You know, my answers are so probably stereotypical.
Yes, but we want to know these things. Come
I'm
on.
inspired by people who have, you know, sort of like I look at somebody like Dolly Parton, who's my birthday twin, FYI. I mean,
Okay.
could you ask for a better birthday buddy than Dolly herself? Um, and you know, I have met her a few times, and she really is what, and I feel like, you know, she's somebody who sort of came from nothing and built this sort of brand for herself and has sort of stayed true to who she is and has been able to sort of keep herself relevant for, I mean, she's been in the entertainment business, what, for more than 50 years now,
Mm-hmm.
so I admire that. I admire sort of somebody who, you know, and I think in a lot of ways when I've seen interviews with her, you know, she's somebody who in many ways felt like an outsider growing up, especially because, you know, their lack of money and their, you know, she you know, she had a certain style of presenting herself, you know, her hair and she, I think, often felt that way, and yet still went out there, believed enough in herself to do, um, you know, to sort of go out there and do her thing. And she connected with people and continues to connect with them more than 50 years later. So I have such admiration for that. Somebody who really just without, you know, with no apologies, just sort of goes out there and does his, her, their thing. And I think, you know, so I find that inspirational. Like I look at that and I think, you know, and then there are writers whose work I love. You know, I'll read, you know, certain memoirs. Like I was very affected by Cheryl Strayed's book Wild.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and, you know, she has a book of advice columns called Tiny Beautiful Things. That I always find, like I look at her and I sort of look at, you know, I read the way she views the world and I find that inspiring and uplifting. So, and there are a number of other writers whose, you know, books I read and I just, I don't know. That's, I would say, let's start there and,
That works.
and work.
That
Yeah.
works. So, what do you do to relax when you're not running around the world?
I like to, my favorite thing to do is be curled up in my bed with, especially this time of year, with the blankets. And my favorite thing is, I don't know if you have a weighted blanket or you've heard of them or ever used one.
I've heard of them. I don't have them. I don't like the feeling,
Oh,
but I know
oh
people
my,
who do. So
love,
that's cool.
I love it. I love it. I find it so calming. So I have my weighted blanket and I curl up with a good book or revisit one of my favorite 80s movies, you know, and, you
Dare
know,
I
sit there.
ask which one tops the list?
Oh, I don't know where to begin. Flashdance, St. Elmo's Fire, About Last Night, all of those movies.
Okay.
Working Girl, Nine to
Okay.
Five. I mean, take me anywhere from 1979 to 1989, and you'll find some of my favorite movies. Not necessarily the most well-made movies,
Well,
but
it's
that
not
doesn't
about
matter.
that.
They're
It's not about that. Not even close.
so that's what I mean. That's my ideal sort of relaxing moments are just sort of being able to curl up and check out, from sort of the craziness of everything and get lost in a book or the nostalgia of a movie that I loved at that time.
Hmm. Okay, so I'm going to ask you some fun questions because I've asked this of all the guys, and so you have to
Okay.
be included in this because it's a poll I'm taking, and it's a fun one. So, Spider-Man or Batman?
Batman,
Okay. Superman or Thor?
Superman,
Green Hornet or Captain America?
Green Hornet.
Oh, really?
You
Okay.
can see I fall on the DC side.
It's okay. It's all right. It's okay. See, you're actually one of maybe two that have said Green Hornet, so that you're in a class almost by
By
yourself.
the way, it's not that don't enjoy the other things. I just, if you're asking me a preference,
No, that's what I'm doing, and
And also,
that's
I'm
total.
somebody who believes, all of this hubbub about, you know, the sort of marvelization of entertainment and how everything's now a big superhero movie. Like, sure, I tend to prefer the more artful, smaller films.
Mm-hmm.
I'll drama any day
Yes.
over a big action movie where I can't even tell what's happening from scene to scene. I'm always like, wait, what? Huh? Um, but I think there's room for everything, and I think people enjoy all kinds of entertainment, and they should have access to it.
Nice. Okay, so what would you have for your superpower if you had one?
I would, um, I would like to have. I sort of like the idea of the invisibility cloak,
Mm.
being
I
able to sort of
sneak
be
into a
around.
room and not be seen. Okay.
Imagine how much more material I would have for books.
Oh, easily, easily. So tell me, what is one unknown skill people may not know about you? Even somebody that might be super close to you.
I don't think. I mean, I think people who are really close to me know this, but I don't think people realize sometimes like how sensitive I am about certain things, and I think sometimes people attribute. Like somebody asked me recently. Um, they said, "Oh well, you don't really spend a lot of time out and about in West Hollywood or on the scene," and they almost looked at it as there was like a deliberate reason that I just that I was sort of pushing that aside, that I don't. And it's not, it has nothing to do with that. It's that I still have my own insecurities, and so I put myself in situations that feel comfortable to me, and sometimes, and I don't put myself in other situations where I feel self-conscious. That's my own, that's my own stuff to deal with. It's not that I am putting something else down. It's just not
I get it.
my comfort level is. So, um, and I think sometimes people think because, I look at things with it, like I've told you earlier, I look at things with a sense of humor, and I am the first to laugh along with something. And sometimes I have a very sarcastic point of view, or my sense of humor will be a little biting. And I think sometimes people don't realize that really underneath that is somebody who really cares about doing right by other people and wanting to be good to other people and is sensitive to other people. And I think sometimes people think that nothing gets to me or nothing gets through, and
Are
and
you
and I
like my
am very.
spirit animal or something? I knew we were going to get along so famously.
Yeah, that people, what people's perceptions are versus reality, and that's why, you hear these quotes all the time, and I'm not one who subscribes to all these inspirational quotes for the most part, but you hear things like, you never know what somebody else is going through.
Right.
You can't look into someone else's life and know what it is that's motivating them to behave a certain way, or what's triggering them to respond to you a certain way or be reactive a certain way. And so I think I've learned, or I've been trying to be much more compassionate to what other people have going on. And that sometimes when people behave a certain way or react to you a certain way, it's not about you.
No.
And it's not something that you can always, I'm so used to personalizing things. And, I grew up being slighted by people and being treated poorly because of the differences people perceived. And so my first reaction is to think that that's happening to me now. So I'm very sensitive, and I think a lot of people don't necessarily know that, or think that I would be.
Well, sometimes reacting with laughter is actually what keeps you from crying. And sometimes
Right.
if you don't put humor into it, a situation can become overwhelming. And so
Right.
it's a coping mechanism. So I get it. I totally get
And
it.
I think we can't ever judge people for how they cope, because this is what I say is, if people could cope differently, they would.
I agree. I
Now,
totally agree.
note that I don't say if they could cope better, because that puts an expectation on people that they should perhaps be doing something differently. I say if they could cope differently, they would.
Right.
And you can't judge people for how they have to deal with what they need to get through.
I get that. So, if you could spend the day with anybody, fictional or real, past or present, who would it be? Who would you like to spend the day with?
I mean, can I say Channing Tatum?
Yes.
Just because,
Yes, you can say anybody you want, hon.
just because I feel like that would be fun. You know what? I have had the good fortune to spend days with so many of the people I could have told you I'd want to. So, I don't know. I feel like I've been there.
Okay.
One person I haven't met who I always wanted to,
Hmm.
and our paths have never crossed. I would say just about everyone else I have crossed paths with. I've never crossed paths with or met Tina Turner, and I have always wanted to.
I can understand that. Talk about
Yeah.
a dynamic woman.
I don't think it's going to happen. She lives in Switzerland. I think she's basically retired. But she's sort of the one who got away. I think everyone else I've had, some either gotten to spend good quality time with, or, whatever. And she's one that I haven't, that I never met, whom I always wanted to. But otherwise, so many of the authors I admire and like, I've had the opportunity to spend time with, and so many of the filmmakers and actors and actresses whom I admire, and even some political figures who, or activist type people whom I think very highly of. I've had the good fortune to meet and spend time with. So
Nice.
I don't know.
That's good.
Let's just say Tina Turner,
That'll work.
as they're all simply the best, right?
She is simply the best. That's so funny. What trait do you like most about yourself?
I mean, I don't know that other people find me so funny, but I appreciate the sense of humor.
Doesn't about them. I said, what trait do you
I
like?
laugh at myself all the time.
I-
I'm
Again,
constantly giving myself material.
laughing or crying. It's like, okay, what was you thinking? Laughter is
As if,
good.
like, laughing through the tears is fine too.
Exactly. Laugh crying is a thing. I swear to God, it is an
Yeah.
actual thing. So,
By the way, I think
yes.
you need to answer the question: Who would you like to spend a day with,
Oh, I honestly, if
or even a meal? You can just a meal. It doesn't even have to be the whole day.
Eleanor Roosevelt
Interesting.
been very high on my list.
I think it would be a hard one to nab down.
Now, yes. Currently living, Oh my God! If I could have lunch with Barbara Streisand, I would love to. I have been a fan of
Well,
hers.
we talked about when I went to
Yes,
see Yentl the other day,
yes,
back to our 80s movie obsession.
yes.
Um, and they were screening Yentl at the Skirball Center, and I thought, I haven't seen it in the theater since 1983.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought to myself, this might be my last opportunity to see it on the big screen. So I went. But yeah, I mean, interesting. I have not met her either, but I mean, I appreciate her talent, but I'm good. I'm okay with. I'm okay with that.
It's funny because I have had mixed feelings about it, but honestly, I would. I mean, it might change how I feel because I've heard mixed reviews.
I'm sure she's lovely. I have no. I can't even speak to. I mean, obviously, I've heard stories from people who have worked with her or been in her presence in different capacities.
Mm-hmm.
So I've heard, firsthand accounts of various things, some positive, some negative. But you're dealing with a human being, and there's always some positive and some negative, and people have good days and they have bad days.
Exactly.
And I think sometimes people don't understand that people in the public eye are entitled to those as well.
You're right.
And one bad moment or one situation does not define a person. One behavior does not define a person. So I'm sure she's lovely. Do I see certain things or read certain things in the press just like you and think to myself, okay, that's fucking bonkers? Absolutely.
But then, if we actually had a person, yeah, if we had the opportunity, I'm sure.
Or a step to.
Yes, but that would be one animated lunch. I'm just saying. It would be
I'm sure.
A very animated lunch. So,
yes.
Yeah. Anyway. And by the way, that closing number from Yentl gets me every single time. The closing number.
It does. When you really look at it, when you look back at it and look how ridiculous it actually is, first of all, she's all of a sudden has obviously there wasn't money. She's it's 1904, I believe, is when the movie's set.
Yes.
And all of a sudden she's got 2 head wraps, and she looks just so, and she's on a boat full of immigrants coming to the new world in America, and she's walking through the boat just singing out, and not one person is even looking askance. Nobody's like, who is this woman who's dressed so nicely, who's walking through and singing in this crazy octave range?
Oh, they probably paid her off to make her go away. That's where she got the money to get on the boat.
No mind. She's just walking through the boat of immigrants singing.
I know, but the song itself is just, oh my God.
I love that song. But it makes absolutely no sense, and it's sort of a very self-serving ending to that movie.
Well, I think it was more about. Yeah.
Can we talk about for one moment how cute Mandy Patinkin was in 1982?
I'm just saying, he was adorable with all them curls.
The curls, just the right amount of body hair, and when he gets out of the water and he shakes his head, and she even. And what's funny is in that moment where that happens, she's even singing that. If you remember the song, "The Way He Makes Me Feel,"
yes,
was the song.
I actually have sang that on several occasions, so I love that song.
It's a song, but when you watch the movie back and he steps out of the water and you see the glistening and the glow, and he shakes his head almost like a dog when they come out of a pool or a bath.
Yes,
and it doesn't get better than. It does not get better than Yentl.
So, what makes you
There's
smile?
so many of these movies. There's so many of these movies when you look back at them. I was just talking the other day.
Yes.
On a podcast I was on. You look back at these movies, like you look at Flashdance, okay?
Yes.
Flashdance was 1983. Jennifer Beals was, what, 18, 19? I don't know. And I'm sure it was made the year before it came out, so maybe she was 18. I don't know. But she was a steel welder.
Uh-huh.
It
can weapon and a ballerina, a steel worker and a ballerina, I suppose.
But she was like a child steel laborer.
Yeah, true.
But yet, none of us cared at the time. It all made sense.
Because we were too busy watching her move her legs, which wasn't really her at 90 miles
Right.
an hour. So,
And of course, when you see all the shots from the top and you see the wig spinning, it's just, there's nothing better. And even the scene where she's sitting in the iconic torn gray sweatshirt.
we all did
with
that. Right after
Michael,
that movie came out, we all were cutting up our sweatshirts.
Right. I remember how Michael Nuri was, and she's sitting there and she's eating lobster. He brings lobster in, and she's eating it so seductively, and she's literally putting it in her mouth like this.
Yes.
Like really
Yes.
deep throating her hand. I mean, you can't. It just doesn't get better.
Yeah, that's where
Anyway.
camp movies come from. So
The best.
the best.
The best.
The best. The best. Okay, so what makes you smile? What makes you happy?
My family and friends and my nieces.
Okay. So what
Yeah.
makes you sad?
People who make me happy.
What makes you sad and angry?
Well, I try to manage my anger these days because, typically anger comes from a place of feeling hurt by something, because we get angry because somebody is not seeing us the way we want to be seen, or they're treating us in a way that we don't want to be treated. So there's like a hurt, and the anger is a reaction to the hurt. So I try to really manage the anger and stop and think about what is being triggered in me,
Mm-hmm.
that's making me want to respond that way. I'm not always successful at it, but I would say I would say when I get triggered in that way, it's when I feel like I'm not being seen or heard, like that I'm trying to, I want somebody to acknowledge something a certain way and they're not. I think that's what's so upsetting to me. What makes me sad is so many things right now are really weigh on me. I think there are so many things that we just really need to get right. I mean, so many things. I don't even want to mention one because I want one to seem more important than the other. But I mean, we have so many things. I mean, that we need to fight for, and I'm constantly, doing the best I can to support organizations like the Human Rights Campaign and the ACLU and Planned Parenthood, and all of the things that I think are under attack right now. Human rights. Mm-hmm. That, why are we in 2019 and needing to have some of these conversations? Those things make me sad, and I do the most I can to support those organizations, whether it's hands-on, showing up and being at something that I can be at, or writing a check when I can. I do everything I can to support those organizations to help make the world a little less sad.
Good. Thank you. What do you want to be remembered for?
It's important that the people close to me remember me a certain way. You can't, that old saying, what other people think of me is none of my business. Mm-hmm. I'm concerned by the people who are important figures in my life. They remember me, and I want them to remember, somebody who cared. Okay. Somebody who cared and was there and present.
I like it. So if you had, and I know this will probably happen anyway, but if you had an autobiography written about you, what would you like it called?
You mean somebody else writing it instead of me?
Well, no, you can write your own. But I still would like to.
You said, that's right. You said autobiography.
Autobiography.
Well, that's already. I mean, technically, memoir and autobiography are. Because an autobiography is a more researched, detailed thing, whereas a memoir is more your recollection of things. But
Mm-hmm.
I think the job's been done. I still think I have a few things to say that will be a later book, but I'm actually working on a third book now, which is fiction. But down the line, there may be another memoir.
Okay. But the title, do you have an idea what you would like to call it?
I do, but I can't. If I told you, I'd
All
have to,
right.
because I love it so much that I don't want it. I don't even want it in the universe
No, I
yet.
get that. I'm totally understanding that completely. I get it. So, talk to me about Enemies Closer.
Yes,
Talk to me about
that
that.
was my.
Give me a
It's
little
supposed
bit.
to be my. Yeah, that was my second book. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's fiction. Although if you think you recognize something or someone, you're probably right.
Okay.
It takes place in Hollywood, and it really sort of dives deep into the culture and some of the things that go on out here. Obviously, it takes readers very behind the curtain, um, as only somebody who's lived it could do. Because even though we hear these stories, you know, until you're in these situations or you're on that red carpet or you can't really know some of what goes on. I've been in all of these situations. I've been in, you know, I've been in things that you wouldn't even if you recounted certain things. Like sometimes people look at certain dialogue from Enemies Close and like, well, that's I can't believe somebody would say that, and it's word for word what
Uh-huh.
happened. But it was sort of inspired by those books of the mid '70s and '80s. If you look back at things like Judith Krantz, "I'll Take Manhattan,"
Yes, love that
uh,
series.
yes, Iris Raynor Dart, who wrote Beaches. Before she wrote Beaches, she wrote a book called Boys in the Mailroom,
Mm-hmm.
uh, which is still pretty edgy, even today. I want to say that book came out in 1979 or 1980, but it was those kinds of books. Susan Isaacs, Compromising Positions, Shining Through, those books at that time period that really resonated with me. And I think that those kinds of books are kind of missing in the marketplace right now. So Enemies Closer was sort of designed to be a modern day version of those books that were so much fun to read in the late '70s and early '80s.
Got it.
So it has a very modern approach, but
Mm,
it works sort of on that level.
nice. Well, I'm looking forward to reading it. It is
Well,
definitely
I can't wait to hear what
it's
you think.
making its way up my reader list. I have I think I have two books ahead of it, but not. I'll have them done before
I'm
the.
not even going to ask what those books are because I don't want to feel bad.
They're ones that I've promised.
Okay,
Otherwise, it's
okay,
a promise thing, and that's
right.
why. That's
We
why.
always keep promises.
Exactly.
That's an important thing, is keeping. That's another thing when you ask me what, I'm proud about myself, is I keep my word.
See, me too. I try to. I mean, there are those times that I just can't. So then I have to I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It just and then I
Right.
sometimes feel worse than the person who I feel like I'm letting down, and it's just like, oh my god, I can't deal with this.
Right, but I mean, intention. I mean, look, life doesn't always work in a way that allows us to do everything as planned.
Right.
So, people need to be flexible to a degree.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
We can't always. I mean, we do our best. The intention, and we do our best to keep our word.
So, what is something that you would like to say to your fans?
I'm just grateful that I am grateful for every single person who reads my books and who sort of comes along on this adventure with me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't take one person for granted, and I get letters all the time from people who have either struggled with coming out, struggled with their sexuality, struggled with feeling different, struggled with eating issues, struggled with suicide, all the time. And it just, it makes me feel so good to hear from people and know that my story resonates and that people can connect to it in a way that's helpful or entertaining. Whatever I can do to make them either feel better or reflect more or change the way he or she sees or they see something, whatever it is, or if they're simply entertained, I'm so grateful for it, and I never for 1 second take it for granted. And I love hearing from people and having a dialogue with people and getting to know people, and I want to be in it. I don't want to be putting it out there and being a passive participant. I want to be in the conversation and hear other people's stories and all of that. And I think that's one of the great. I mean, look, there's, like, as we said earlier, there are positives and negatives to everything.
Yes.
There's there are good things about social media. There's a dark side to social media, but one of the things that I love about it is that it does give people an opportunity to meet and connect. I mean, look, you and I wouldn't have connected if not for that, and I'm so happy that we did. So, I think that it's in that respect, it's really a gift.
Nice. I like that. That's great. So this airs the weekend before Christmas. So you and I had chatted about that, and we are going to be giving an autographed copy of one of your books away. So, anybody, the fans that are watching this, all they're going to have to do is comment on my website under your show and include
only positively, because
only
remember
positively, yes.
Because remember how sensitive I am, A, and B, we are not trafficking in negativity.
Exactly. This is positive power forward.
Yeah.
So they just need to comment and register on the website for the show, and they will be entered into a drawing for a signed copy of one of Josh's books. That to be decided.
You know what? Well, I'm going to up the game.
Yes.
And I'm going to give one of each of my books.
Ooh.
And they can be signed, and if you want them personalized, whoever it is who wins that, I can personalize for them or not, whatever the preference is.
Nice. Oh my gosh, thank you, Josh. That's wonderful. So again, people, just so you know, you need to register on the website, which I will include when we post the show. There's a place that will be there for commenting. In order to comment on my website, though, you have to register with the website. So once you register, you are entered into drawing for one of Josh's, or both of Josh's books now, and we'll move forward from there, and then you will be reached out, and we'll arrange to send you your books. So thank you for that wonderful Christmas gift. I know. Yes. Yes. And I honestly want to tell you, thank you very much for sitting down with me and sharing parts of your life, even more than what you did in your book. It was nice to sit down and have a first face-to-face conversation with you.
I'm so glad we got to do this.
I am too. And I've learned even more about you.
Sure. It's such a crazy time of year, and I know when you and I were trying to schedule, and I was thinking to myself, oh, it sounds like I'm, my life isn't always this hectic. Just things that, like the weeks leading up, like between Thanksgiving and Christmas, it's like you're pulled in so many directions. And then I always feel like I need to show up at this person's thing and that person's thing, and I try to do as much as I can, but I run myself ragged trying to do it.
I understand. I totally understand. But I'm glad that we found the time to do it. So I'm super excited to share this with everybody, and I thank you again for being on the show.
Of course. And I wish you a very happy holiday and a healthy 2020, and I look forward to our continued friendship in the new year.
Definitely. Thank you again, Josh.
All right.